Hi, everybody. This is Pastor Tim Madison from Bainbridge First Baptist Church, Bainbridge Island, Washington, with a message for you from God's Word this evening. You know, whenever a new year begins, and we've got one coming up in just a few days, it's always a good time to consider some of the things that God has done for us in the past year, if we do it in the right way. In fact, that's just what the Lord asks His people to do in our text I want to share with you this evening. It's in Haggai chapter 2. Verses 1 to 3, where God looks back on this past provision for them. Our text says, "In the 7th month, in the 21st day of the month, came the word of the Lord by the prophet Haggai, saying, Speak now to Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and to Joshua, the son of Jozadak, the high priest, and to the residue of the people, saying, Who is left among you that saw this house in her first glory? And how do you see it now? Is it not in your eyes, in comparison of it, as nothing?" Well, again, this message is dated. It's from October 520 BC. It says the second year of Darius, the king of Persia. Darius was pro-Israel. He made it possible for the work on the temple in Jerusalem to continue. And that's where we are. Work on the temple had stopped for about 15 years until Haggai began his ministry. And builders had been at work about a month after the first message, the one we looked at yesterday. The first message was addressed to the governors Zerubbabel and Joshua, the high priest, and they were to carry it to the people. But this one is directly addressed to all the people. And now that construction was underway, people were comparing this temple with Solomon's amazing temple, just like they did 15 years ago. And the question implies that there were some of those, or among them, who had seen the first house in its glory, but very few. When the foundations of the first temple were laid, many were there. Solomon's temple had been destroyed for 70 years, and so anyone who had seen Solomon's temple would be in their 70s or 80s, and looking back at what it must have looked like to a young child, an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old, you can just imagine how amazing that temple was. And now they were building something that just seemed so much smaller than that. They were focused on what happened in the past. In Ezra chapter 3, 12 to 13, it says, when they laid the foundation for the new temple that they were building, some people were shouting for joy and some people were weeping because it was just such a small temple in comparison with what they remembered. And you couldn't tell the difference between the people who were shouting and the people who were weeping because they were depressed. But God had done a great work for them and providing for the first temple. But I want you to realize this is a theological issue that came up when they looked at the small size of this new temple and what they were building. And the question is this: does a more modest new temple mean that God accepted Solomon, but not so much them? Did he reject them, and that's why their temple was smaller? Was God more pleased with Solomon than with them? And as they thought back on what God had done in both cases, the one thing they needed to know was that God was behind their efforts. The Spirit was still working in Israel, just as in the days of Exodus. And our text mentions that if you keep reading, when he was doing miracles and giving them the 10 Commandments, and they didn't have a temple at all. Eventually, they did have a tabernacle, a tent, and yet God was undeniably with them. This was a critical issue. The size of the building and their budget and their cash on hand are all incidentals compared to the major question that they needed to ask. And that question is this: is God in this? Is he a part of what we're doing? You know, I think sometimes Christians look at some of the things God has done in the past, some of the great revivals that you may have read about that took place in our country, or maybe your home church was flourishing more in past days than it is today, or maybe your pastor um, seems like he was doing better years ago than he is now. I don't know. It's true, God has done some great things in the past, but you know what? We can learn from them and we can build on them, and the important thing for us is the same question: is God in this? Is he a part of what we are doing? So when you think about the past, there are different ways that you can handle it. You can ignore the past. Some people would rather do that, not even think about what happened before. We can be bound by the past, and every question is always defined by what did we do last year? Or we can learn from the past. And most importantly, we understand that as we think about what God has done in the past, we can build on the past, and we can do that when God is with us. And that's what you need to know as you think about this text this evening. Have a great evening, and I'll be back again with you very soon.